everyone, and welcome to the Accelerate webinar series hosted by the Daniels College of Business Executive Education Department. I'm Camila Angelin, Assistant Director of Business Development, and I'll be your host today. As you know, the Accelerate webinar series is designed to help you accelerate your capacity to deliver results for your organization. Our webinar today will be about 25 minutes long, starting with a brief presentation from our faculty and then moving to questions and answers at the end. Feel free to submit a question whenever you'd like by using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Today, we're pleased to have Amy Phillips join us again in our webinar. Amy joined us in 2020 to talk about the importance of data visualization, and today she comes back to discuss how we can utilize today's powerful visualization software to create an impact on your organization. Amy has been a faculty member at the Daniels College of Business for over 20 years in the Department of Business Information and Analytics. She teaches a variety of data classes in the areas of internet architecture and database management, and is highly regarded for her book, Business-Driven Information Systems, the leading management information systems textbook in the world. Amy is a dynamic, engaging, and passionate professor. She's our data guru, and we're so pleased to have her. Amy, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Camilla. Welcome. So in the 1850s, there was a cholera outbreak in a district in London called Soho. Over 600 people died during this outbreak. There's a local physician, his name was Dr. John Snow, who was trying to figure out what was causing the cholera outbreak. Now, the conventional wisdom at the time was that cholera was spread. It was an airborne disease. But Dr. Snow, what he ended up doing is collecting data and plotting on a map where all the victims were in the region. And using this data and this, what we would call crude visualization, he found that the source was actually from a water pump on Broad Street. So it wasn't airborne, it actually came from contaminated water. Welcome everyone to our webinar on the impact of data visualization. I'm Amy Phillips, faculty, giving a discussion today on this webinar. So our focus today during this webinar is really going to be 3 points I want to make with you. And the first one is it's really not about the data, which might shock some of you. The second thing is looking at visual signals and coding. And the third takeaway, focus, is how do we create simple yet impactful visualizations? So the first thing I want us to focus on is we're surrounded by discussions on data, data, data. And here's an article, Harvard Business Review, When Data Creates a Competitive Advantage. And my favorite is actually the subtitle, and when it doesn't. We're so focused on that data. So let me ask you all a question. This is an important question. What data, if you had it, would change the way you run your business? Now I'm going to pause there for a second. And I want you to really think about what data, if you had it, would change the way you run your business, do your job, fill in the blank. See, the problem is we focus on the data and not what we should be focusing on. And that is, what's the question you all need answered? If we focus more on the questions that we need answered, then we can go get the data. Chances are you have the data. It may not be in the form you want. It may not be easily accessible, but chances are you have the data or can at least get the data. So let's pause again. What question do you need answered that would then change the way you run your business or do your job? Put the focus on the questions we need answered and not necessarily, here's all the data that I have, what can I learn from it? The 5 most influential visualizations of all time, according to one resource, this happens to come from Tableau. Number 5 was what I mentioned at the beginning of our webinar, which was the cholera map from Dr. Snow. This is 1854, going all the way down to number 1, the chart of biography by Joseph Priestley. Now, keep this in perspective. This laundry list here, a small laundry list. Several of these, many of these examples are in the 1800s. So number 1, that chart of biography. This is, if you're not familiar with Joseph Priestley, he's not a household name, but he was trying to teach his students, he was an educator, he was trying to teach his students the relationship between the nations of the past and the people that define them. But what was intriguing about this example, unlike Dr. Snow's example that we cited earlier, is that Professor Priestley used 2 maps. He used 2 maps, and they were 2 visually different maps to convey the same message. Here is the map that I was citing earlier. If you look closely at this map, you can see little black dots, and each dot represented where someone was infected with cholera. And if you zoom in, you are able to actually see that it's a water pump on Broad Street that was the source. But both Professor Priestley and Dr. Snow both started with a question. In this case, Dr. Snow was, what was causing the cholera outbreak? Was it truly airborne, or was it something different? So recently, fast forward, we've gone from hearing buzzwords and terms about data visualization to now visual analytics. That happens to be the buzzword du jour right now. And what is visual analytics? And I'd like to provide you with a very, very simple definition just for some context. And that is, visual analytics is a form of inquiry in which data that provides insight into solving a problem is displayed, and this is where I need you dialed in, is an interactive, graphical manner. This is very different than the examples that I showed earlier with Professor Priestley and Dr. Snow. They were not interactive. They were graphical, yes, but they were not interactive. So some of you are probably wondering, why do we even visualize data? And I'd like to have a little exercise to kind of illustrate why visualizing data is so effective, but really has a huge impact. So first of all, just to tee up a little exercise here is, how do we even process signals? Now, we don't have to get uber geeky here, but we know that those signals come through the eye and they get processed really, really, really quickly. We're talking 50 milliseconds, okay? 50 milliseconds. That's super quick. So what if I asked you to count the 5s? Go ahead and count them. Well, that was 5 seconds, by the way. That wasn't even 50 milliseconds. That was 5 seconds. How many did you count? 3? 10? Didn't have enough time? Well, let me prove a point here. Wonder if I took that same visual, but I added a little coding to it. What did I just do to this figure? I added the color red. I was able to tease out the data for you very quickly. Everybody tracking with me? Well, let's take the exact same data, so same data, but let's visualize it a little differently. Let's do this. Let's use a bar chart, just a standardized. Does this help with understanding the data? Or, as I asked you, count the 5s. How many 5s? And I put them in an order from 0 to 9. Let's use the exact same data again, but let's code it just a whisker differently. Let's sort it. Does this help? I hope you're all saying yes. I hope you're all saying yes. Is it easier? Absolutely. Is it more effective? I hope so. I hope so. So if we look even at another issue with an outbreak. So instead of the cholera, the influenza outbreak. This is fast forward 1918. It parallels how that data informed and controlled that pandemic. What did we see? Fast forward 100 years, and we see a map, a geographic map, plotting the flu pandemic of that time. Effective? Yes. Fast forward to today. Johns Hopkins University has created a COVID dashboard that they publicize. They make their data freely available. It is one of the most cited resources that is relating to COVID. And now look at the rich amount of data that we have access to. And look at the different visualizations. Yes, there's a map. There's a geographic map. But there's also cards, very specific data elements that are being displayed. There are charts showing, visualizing, if you will, the cases, sadly, the deaths, but also our vaccination rates. What would it be like if you and I could use this freely available data and built our own dashboard? Here is a dashboard which I'm going to demonstrate soon here using a free piece of software called Power BI. I am bringing in that same data that Johns Hopkins is using and provides for us freely. I am able to bring that in, create some relationships in the data, and display this. So why is this so effective? First of all, our eyes are immediately drawn to those colors and patterns. If I go back to either the dashboard I created using Power BI or the dashboard Johns Hopkins created, where are your eyes? Where do they go? They immediately go to those colors, which is what we teed up earlier. If I just showed you a bunch of numbers on the screen, they were just numbers. But we create some kind of visual coding. Our culture is more visual when compared to really other senses. And then when we can see data on a chart, we can quickly comprehend trends and outliers. Immediately in these graphs and charts, we can immediately see some of those trends. And we can immediately detect some outliers as well. And thirdly, good visualizations should craft a story. And often we want to remove the noise from data and just highlight that useful information. So a good visualization crafts a story. And what we're trying to do is remove the noise from the data and highlight just the useful information. And it's really up to us to craft that story. I want to share with you a very interesting visual here in terms of using Lego. So we've got data that's sorted, that's arranged, that's presented visually, and then explains a story. So shout out to one of our exec ed folks, Sarah McAfee, who showed this to me. What I'd like to do right now is to pivot right into Power BI and demonstrate, albeit briefly, some of what I use to create that dashboard, taking in the Johns Hopkins data. Again, I want to make sure that everybody understands that that data is freely available. It's posted in a GitHub repository every day. It's updated every day around midnight Eastern Standard Time. And I have the ability, everyone has the ability to go grab that data and visualize it the way that you want to visualize it. So I've created a bit of an executive summary. I'm not going to go through every one of the buttons. There's actually a dashboard just trying to tease out different types of stories. What I'd like to start with real quickly, because it's important that we understand that data has a relationship. All data has some kind of a relationship. So when I say I'm bringing in that data from Johns Hopkins University, don't think there isn't a little bit of manipulation. There's an ETL process, an extract, transform, and load process that has to be done, whether you're using Power BI or Tableau or Domo or whatever visualization tool. Even if you were using Excel, there's a little bit of ETL, again, extract, transform, and load. So here is the model that is being used when I bring that data in. And there's some cleansing that's going on in order to actually use that in our storytelling. So I want to just share that very, very, very briefly with you. And going back to the report view, if anyone's familiar with Power BI, then you should understand how this works. If you're not, then I'm just going to very, very briefly kind of explain what's going on. So here's my dashboard. It's really more of a report, and I'm just bringing in fields in which to visualize the data. I'm just going to quickly go to that Johns Hopkins dashboard that I created that you saw earlier. Let this load fairly quickly. So I try to literally mirror Johns Hopkins dashboard just to prove that we can use a free piece of software in order to mimic that. And we have a variety of different visualizations going on here. We have just some cards with discrete values. We have a geographic map. We also have some line charts and graphs that show that trend. So this is telling a pretty interesting story here. Again, there's a little bit of magic that is going on behind the scenes. I'm not just grabbing those discrete values and plotting them. There's actually some math that's going on in aggregating this data. And we can have some fun in here and looking at different types of global trends. I'm using some custom visuals that Power BI provides for free. These are free resources. So it's crafting a little different story. One in particular that I really like is on the U.S., just focusing on the United States itself. There's a U.S. state and county resource that Johns Hopkins makes available. And what I love about this is we can choose any state we want. This happens to be Colorado. I'll give a quick shout out to my home state of New Hampshire. You can see all the data is now, it's interactive. I'm interacting with this dashboard. It is up to us, people, for us to give our data a story. But there's one huge takeaway from our discussion today, and that is, please start with a question. Then go get the data. And it's up to you to give the data that story. Thanks so much for spending time with me today and talking about data visualization. I really enjoyed my time with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for this awesome presentation, a lot of great insights. I have a question about the piece that you talk about questions. So you say we need to start with a question before we jump into the data. So what are some questions professionals can ask themselves before they dive into just organizing their data and making it look good and making it look visually better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I often hear that too. And really there's kind of two pieces to answering that question. Mm-hmm. And one is what problem are you trying to solve? Is there a particular business problem you're trying to solve, and form that into a question? And the other is, what opportunities are you trying to seek? Is there a particular opportunity that you're trying to, whether it's a marketing opportunity or customer opportunity or product opportunity or service opportunity, what opportunities exist? And take those, craft them into questions, and then go get the data, see if you can't answer them. Now, a quick disclaimer, and that is we don't always get to the why. We often, through those questions, get to the what, when, how, and where. We don't always get to the why, because the why in answering that often leads to other questions and other questions and other questions. So, but just crafting an overarching question is a great place for everybody to start, and not just looking at their data.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then the other question is, what if you don't have a data department to use so you shared great tools, you shared some things that are free that we can use. What if you don't have a data department? How do you go about using those tools?
Well, luckily, at least one of the tools that I mentioned, the tool that I mentioned, which is Power BI, is free. And the nice thing is a lot of people can use their already existing Excel skills. There's a small assumption that most business people have used Excel before. And the transition from using something like Excel into a Power BI, there isn't a steep learning curve. And there's so many resources that are out there, whether it's a YouTube video or it's a class taken here at DU. Most of these tools are pretty easy to use.
Yeah. And then one thing that we hear a lot is people that are interested in learning more about Power BI or learning about this class, they get really concerned about their backgrounds, and they start asking questions about, do we need a lot of coding skills? Do I need a programming background? Do I need to know a lot about math? So tell us about that. Do they need all of this stuff on their background to be able to attend one of these classes or to learn more about Power BI?
No. Yes and no, right? So even using Excel, you could be a power user or you could know nothing. So in something like using Power BI as a visualization tool, do you need to be a coder? No. Should you have some familiarity with writing basic formulas? It's very helpful. It's very helpful. Again, I'll go back to a comment I made with the previous question, which is one of the reasons we do use Power BI is there's a natural transition from using Excel to Power BI. In a lot of the formulas that we use in Excel translate into Power BI. So having a coding background, no, not necessary. Having some familiarity with basic formulas like those that you would use in Excel is helpful, but it's not critical. It's not critical.
Awesome. Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. And to our participants, thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. If you liked what Amy shared, I encourage you to learn more about the data visualization using Power BI workshop that Amy teaches at Executive Education. This workshop will help you learn how to create, analyze, and evaluate large data sets that will enable you to turn mountains of raw data into meaningful stories that inform decisions and drive change. This class is coming up, and you can learn more about it on our website, daniels.du.edu/accelerate, or reach out to us directly. Before we go, we do recognize that summer is coming and that you will be enjoying your time either on the trails, driving, camping, and not so much on your computer. So we are excited to announce that we will be relaunching our podcast with our past Accelerate webinars starting this June 16th, giving you the option to listen to us anywhere you go. You can find the Accelerate podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. So please keep an eye out for those and continue working on your learning and development while you're out and about. And we will see you live again this fall. Once again, thank you for joining us today. We hope you gain new insight that will accelerate your impact in your community, your organization, and the world. From the University of Denver, Daniels College of Business Executive Education Department, we look forward to seeing you again on the Accelerate webinar series. Thank you, everyone.